Major funding for Religion and Ethics News Weekly is provided by the Lilly Endowment, an Indianapolis-based private family foundation dedicated to its founders' interest in religion, community development, and education. Additional funding also provided by Mutual of America, designing customized individual and group retirement products. That's why we're your retirement company.
Welcome. I'm Bob Abernethy. It's good to have you with us. This week, President Obama was in Myanmar for the East Asia Summit, a meeting of regional leaders. It was his second visit in 2 years to the country, which emerged from military rule 4 years ago. Obama pressed lawmakers in the largely Buddhist country to speed up reforms, such as protecting the rights of the Rohingya Muslim minority. Many Rohingya are considered stateless, and the UN has called them one of the most persecuted minorities in the world. Here in the U.S., an emotional welcome home for two Americans who had been jailed in North Korea, Kenneth Bay and Matthew Todd Miller. They were released after a top U.S. intelligence official visited North Korea, although it's unclear what exactly led to their freedom. Bay is a devout Christian who was arrested in 2012 and sentenced to 15 years of hard labor for allegedly plotting against the North Korean government. He is now recovering from ailments he suffered in prison. Dr. Craig Spencer returned home this week from a New York City hospital after testing free of the Ebola virus. He'd been diagnosed with the virus 3 weeks ago after treating Ebola patients in Guinea. Vice President Joe Biden praised faith groups for their efforts to fight the disease in West Africa. He said their ability to understand cultural differences makes them effective. In Liberia, the state of emergency was lifted due to the declining rate of infections, though the country remains on alert amid reports of new outbreaks in rural areas. A human rights group said this week that U.S.-led airstrikes against Islamic State militants in Syria have killed more than 860 people, including 50 civilians. The Syrian Observatory for Human Rights said women and children were among the civilian deaths. Meanwhile, the U.S. continued its assault on ISIS around the Syrian border town of Kobani. In recent weeks, Kurdish fighters from Iraq have arrived to help defend the strategic town. ISIS and other extremist groups have been waging an active campaign, especially on social media, to recruit Muslims in other parts of the world to join them. Studies show that only a tiny percentage of American Muslims are committing terrorist acts or leaving to fight with ISIS. Still, in the face of the challenge, more and more U.S. Muslim groups are launching new initiatives to prevent violent extremism from taking hold in their communities. And, as Kim Lawton reports, some of the efforts have been controversial.
In Washington, D.C., Imam Zia Maktoum and his wife Fatima Popel are participating in an annual Interfaith Unity Walk.
We're probably going to need another box for this.
They've brought along members of Make Space, the group they founded in 2012 for young Muslims. It's been a full day of learning about other religious traditions and doing a service project, making meals for the homeless. The couple says activities like this build a positive self-identity among young American Muslims, and they believe that will help prevent the youth from becoming susceptible to extremist ideas.
We want to feel as though we are part of the society. You can be a Muslim and an American at the same time.
You can't just say I'm an American and then not give back to your country. So this is an opportunity to bridge gaps and to create dialogue and positive dialogue.
As ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and other terrorist groups ramp up their recruiting efforts in the West, many Islamic organizations in the U.S. are launching new initiatives aimed at preventing radicalization. They say while the number of American Muslims seeking to commit acts of terror is small, the issue must be addressed.
Our biggest problem as Muslims and what we're facing right now is extremism. We need to nip it in the bud, and that is through creating these healthy communities, and not just here in America, but all around the world, so that Muslims can talk about these issues in an open environment and really take back our faith.
But it's been a controversial prospect. Some Muslims fear new projects to combat extremism will imply that the problem is bigger than it really is. And other Muslim voices are pushing for even more internal critique.
The pathway to get there does involve airing dirty laundry, does involve open public acknowledgement that we have core interpretations, not the scripture, but interpretations of the scripture that need to be modernized and are used by radicals.
Earlier this year, the Muslim Public Affairs Council, MPAC, released its Safe Spaces initiative, which the group describes as a toolkit to help mosques and local community centers combat violent extremism. MPAC National Policy Analyst Hoda El-Shashtawi says they recommend a multi-step process, which starts with holistic projects to help prevent extremism from ever taking hold.
Usually what we found in a majority of these cases is that troubled individuals really have underlying issues, whether it's mental health issues, family issues at home, that these issues are not being dealt with. So our prevention programs are creating these safe spaces so that people can talk about issues and grievances that they have and work through them in a healthy way.
Imam Makhdoom says his Make Space group tries to provide a constructive platform for discussion of grievances about things like perceived discrimination and racial profiling or disagreements with U.S. foreign policy.
And so we seek God's guidance, and we seek His mercy, and we seek His assistance in all our affairs.
He believes religious education is another key element for preventing radicalization.
The more they understand Islam and the teaching of Islam, the less likely they are to fall for that kind of thing, and research has shown that.
The Quran really is a book about choices, right?
Makhdoom and a growing number of American Muslim leaders are taking their message online to try and reach young people through social media, the very place ideological extremists often wield the most influence.
It's important for the sane voices, the moderate voices, the true authentic voices of Islam to take the battle to them.
If an individual appears to be moving toward radicalization, MPAC urges community and religious leaders to surround that person in a proactive intervention. And after that, if the person seems to be moving toward violence, MPAC advises he or she should be ejected from the community with the knowledge of law enforcement. Across the country, Muslim groups have been trying to build good relationships with law enforcement to facilitate this. But El-Shashtawi says there have been several points of tension.
You can talk about FBI tactics with informants. You can talk about the use of surveillance, widespread surveillance. There are real issues that we need to deal with as American Muslims and as we build those relationships with law enforcement.
In Phoenix, Arizona, Maricopa County Attorney Bill Montgomery has been meeting with members of the local Muslim community in an effort he hopes can be a model for other cities. He says trust needs to go both ways.
It can be challenging at times because of the continuing need to maintain that open dialogue and communication. It's too easy for people to fall back on stereotypes, whether out of ignorance or an outright effort to discriminate. So it's that constant communication that's required.
Even if someone is identified as a radical, Montgomery says often there's only so much law enforcement can do. That puts much of the responsibility back on the Muslim community.
We don't have a future crime squad, and we don't have thought police, but rather to bring those individuals to the attention of local community leaders who can help clarify what is and is not acceptable in authentic Islamic teaching.
One of the Muslim leaders Montgomery meets with regularly is Dr. Zuhdi Jasser, president of the American Islamic Forum for Democracy and a member of the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom.
Allahu Akbar.
He says he's pleased more Muslim groups are trying to combat any extremism before it turns to violence. But he believes many of the new initiatives don't go deep enough in addressing ideology, what he calls the battle for the soul of Islam.
We love our faith, but we want to have a debate about what entails the identification and the laws and the rules of that faith. We need to have a vibrant critique of our ideologies so that we can grow.
Jasser has generated strong controversy within the Muslim community. He's highly critical of political Islam and urges what he calls the separation of mosque and state. He says sermon on grievances.
Unfortunately, there's just so much demonization of America that it becomes fodder for those kids that go off and become radicals to then feel they're justified in their acts of terror.
Jasser founded the Muslim Liberty Project to promote American values among young Muslim leaders. Courtney Lonergan and Seema Kassab lead the Muslim Liberty Project at Arizona State University. Lonergan is a convert to Islam who says she's been shocked by the level of anger she's heard inside some parts of the U.S. Muslim community.
I work with so many young people, it's easy just to blame somebody else and take the victim mindset. Oh, poor me, this is what happened. And there's not a lot that's happening in the community to empower young people.
The issue is that most Muslims aren't like that, but we have to go out there and show people that. We have to show the world that Muslims themselves.
If you instill in our youth and in our Muslim communities a love and passion for America, for liberty, for a nation state based in freedom, that all people are equal, they would never be radicalized.
Hoda El-Shashtawi says it's important to tackle the problem of extremism without condemning all of Islam or fomenting anti-Muslim bigotry. She says American Muslims won't allow their faith to be defined by ISIS.
They are destruction. They have nothing to do with building of life, whereas Islam is about enjoining what is good. It's about life. It's about preserving human rights, dignity, justice. And so what we've seen is that Muslims now are taking back that narrative.
She says grassroots, community-wide efforts are the only way that can happen. I'm Kim Lawton reporting.